The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the pine walls. Outside, the Montana wind howled, a lonely sound that wrapped around the cabin like a shroud. Inside, it was warm, the air thick with the scent of roasting meat and the low murmur of family conversation. This was supposed to be the celebration, the final closing, the retirement. Jack Callahan stood at the head of the rough-hewn table, his calloused hand resting on the back of a hand-revered chair. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been weathered by decades of decisions and a quiet, unyielding demeanor that had made him a legend in circles no one in this room knew about. His gray eyes swept over the assembled group. His wife, Clara, sat to his right, her smile a little too bright, a little too practiced. Her brother, Ricus, was across from her, already on his third glass of expensive red wine that Jack himself had never been able to stomach. Ricus's wife, Loretta, was picking at her food, her eyes darting around the cabin with a predatory gleam. And then there was Clara's mother, Elizabeth, perched like a queen in the most comfortable chair, her thin lips pressed into a tight line of approval. "To Jack," Clara said, raising her glass. The crystal caught the firelight. "To the end of the road." They all raised their glasses. Jack lifted his own, a simple ceramic mug filled with water. He didn't drink anymore. Not since the incident. Not since he'd been forced to walk away from the life he'd built. "To new beginnings," Ricus echoed, his voice a little too loud. He drained his glass and slammed it down, his eyes glinting with something that wasn't quite warmth. "I have to say, Jack, this place is rustic, a real change of pace from the city. But I guess that's the point, right? When you've got nothing left to prove, you can just fade away up here." Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He took a slow sip of his water. "It's quiet," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's what I wanted." "Quiet is good," Elizabeth said, her voice saying a sharp. "For a man like you, Jack, all that business, all those years, it's good to have a place to just be still, to let the world forget about you." She set her fork down with a delicate clink. "And for the family to have a place to gather. A legacy." The word hung in the air. Legacy. Dinner continued, a stilted affair of forced pleasantries and heavy silences. Jack observed them all, his mind a steel trap. He saw the way Clara's eyes kept flicking to the deed, framed and hanging on the wall by the fireplace. He saw the way Ricus's gaze lingered on the antique safe in the corner. He saw the way Loretta measured the SQUA footage with a calculating look. They were vultures, circling a Ricus they thought was still alive. They didn't know the Ricus had teeth. Later, the dishes were clear red. The wine bottles were empty. Ricus was sprawled on the leather sofa, snoring softly. Loretta had retreated to the guest room, her heels clicking on the wood floor. Elizabeth was knitting by the fire, a portrait of maternal peace. Clara came and sat beside Jack, resting her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy, Jack?" she asked, her voice soft. "This is what you wanted." He looked at her. This woman he'd married 10 years ago. A trophy, some might have said. A sharp, intelligent woman who'd seemed to offer him a refuge from the cold world of intelligence and warfare. He'd been a ghost, a weapon, a man who moved in shadows. He'd seen her as his light. He'd been a fool. "It's what I needed," he said. That she kissed his cheek. "You're exhausted. Go to bed. I'll clean up here." He nodded, rising slowly. He was tired, his body aching from the long drive and the years of accumulated pain. He walked to the master bedroom, a small, simple space with a bed that looked out onto the dark forest. He lay down, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. He didn't sleep. He never really slept. He waited. It came just past midnight. The low hum of voices from the living room. They thought he was asleep. They thought he was an old, broken man. He slipped out of bed, his movements silent as a shadow. He didn't put on his slippers. His bare feet were silent on the cold wood floor. He moved down the short hallway, his shoulder brushing against the wall, and stopped at the corner, hidden by the deep darkness of the unlit passageway. The fire had died down to a low glow, casting the main room in a dim, orange twilight that they were all there. Clara, Americus, Loretta, Elizabeth. The pretense was gone. The masks had slipped. "He's out cold," Americus said, his voice now sharp and sober. "I checked. He's like a dead man." Clara's voice was tight, tinged with anxiety. "The deed is in the frame. It's for the whole parcel, 38 acres. The appraisal we got was conservative. It's worth at least 3 times what he paid." 3 times. Loretta's eyes widened in the firelight. "Americus, that's enough to fix everything." Americus cut her off. "Enough to pay off our debts. Enough to buy that property in Aspen. This cabin is the key. We sell it, we split the proceeds, and we don't look back. Your father's medical bills are refinished, Clara," Elizabeth said, her voice cold. "This is the only way to get the capital. He's a fossil. He bought this place to rust away. We can make it a real asset. A place for the entire family." "He'll have to sign it over," Clara said. She was looking at the deed. She was not looking at the hallway. "He's so sentimental about it. He'll never do it willingly." Americus laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "Willingly? Who said anything about willingly? We have the power of attorney you forged for his medical CA. We have his signature on file from the bank. We just draw up the new papers, tell him he's getting the cabin renovated, and have him sign them. He's so out of it he won't even read them. We'll have the title in your name in a week. Then we sell." "And what about him?" Loretta asked. "Where does he go?" Elizabeth's lips curled into a thin smile. "He's a veteran, isn't he? He has a pension. He can go to one of those state homes. Somewhere with a view of a parking lot. It's more than he deserves. He's been a burden on this family long enough." Clara didn't protest. She nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I'll get the papers drawn up tomorrow. Americus, you'll need to be the witness." "Done," he said, rubbing his hands together. "This place is going to be our retirement fund. Jack's just the storage locker. We're just getting our deposit back." They all laughed. It was a quiet, conspiratorial sound, the sound of wolves closing in on a wounded deer. They talked about real estate agents, about staging the cabin, about the fast car Americus was going to buy and the shopping spree Loretta was planning. They talked about Jack like he was already gone. Jack listened. He felt the cold rage settle in his bones, a familiar, crystalline fury that he'd thought he'd left behind in a different life. He remembered the missions, the betrayals, the enemies who'd smiled while he bled. He'd been the shadow that ended empires. He'd been the ghost that haunted tyrants. He'd bought this cabin with the money he'd earned cleaning up the world's messes, and he'd chosen this quiet, perfect place in the middle of nowhere to be the first thing he'd ever truly owned, the first place he'd ever considered home. And they were going to steal it from him while he slept. He stepped back into the bedroom. He didn't go back to bed. He went to the closet, pushed aside his flannel shirts, and reached up to the high shelf. His fingers found the cold, familiar metal of a lockbox. He brought it down, the weight heavy in his hands. He punched in a code that wasn't his birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were his memories. A few old photographs, a medal or two, and a stack of documents, thick and official, with seals from governments that didn't officially exist. A black credit card with no name on it. A small UNMA record device that flickered with a faint green light. He took out a single, slim leather folder. Inside, it was filled with microfiche records, financial ledgers, and a certified copy of a Congressional Medal of Honor. Our ride with honors that had never been made public. He took out a burner phone. He typed a single message to a number that hadn't been used in YRS. Phase 2. He put the lockbox back, put his flannel shirts in place, and lay down on the bed. He closed his eyes. A smile touched his lips. It was not a YRM smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just discovered his prey was fat, slow, and didn't know it was being hunted. He listened to them out there, laughing, planning their future with his money. They had no idea. They thought they were the wolves. They were about to find out they were just lambs, bleeding in the dark. They had drawn first blood, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had woken the sleeping giant. Morning light streamed through the cabin windows, harsh and unwelcoming. Jack was already up, a pot of black coffee brewing on the ancient stove. The smell filled the space, an artichoke, bitter aroma that seemed to contradict the syrupy sweetness of the conversation that was about to take place. Clara came out of the bedroom, her hair perfectly coiffed, a robe tied tightly around her waist. She looked fresh. She looked like she'd slept like a baby. "Good morning, honey," she said, her voice laced with an artificial cheerfulness. "You're up, early. "I don't sleep much," Jack said, turning from the stove. His eyes were clear. His hands were steady. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Coffee, please." She walked to the table, where a new, thick document was waiting. It looked official. It was covered in legal jargon and fine print. Americus was already there, wearing a pressed shirt and a confident smirk. He was holding a sleek, expensive pen. Loretta and Elizabeth were hovering in the background, like two RKS scenting blood in the water. "Jack," Clara began, her tone shifting to something more serious. "We've been talking about the cabin." She placed a hand on the document. "The place is great, but it needs some work. Big work. The foundation is showing signs of settling. There's some rot in the support beams. I had a contractor come out and look at the blueprints." Jack raised an eyebrow. He hadn't seen a contractor. He hadn't seen a truck. He knew there wasn't a single problem with the foundation. He'd built it himself with his own two hands, using techniques that had been used to build bunkers in the middle of war zones. He said nothing. "It's going to be expensive," Americus chimed in. "Leaning four-way road. We're talking major structural repairs. But don't worry, we found a solution. An investor. A real estate investment trust. They're willing to fund the repairs in exchange for a small percentage of the property." Jack took a sip of his coffee. "A small percentage. A tiny stake," Clara said, her eyes wide and earnest. "It's a standard RD contract. We protect your ownership, get the repairs done, and the property value skyrockets. It's for your own good, Jack. For our future." Jack looked at the document. He saw a transfer of title. He saw a power of attorney that was worded as broadly as the ocean. He saw his own forged signature, a perfect copy, already inked onto a line NEA the bottom. They had read everything. They had planned for his compliance. They assumed he was just a dumb old man, his mind eroded by years in the service. "Let me see that," he said. His voice flat. LRA slid the document across the table. Jack picked it up. He read it slowly, deliberately, as if he was a man trying to decipher a foreign language. He was an expert in the languages of power, authority, and deception. He'd been reading documents like this for 40 years, in war rooms, in embassies, in secret facilities. This was a child's prank compa read to the complex conspiracies he'd unraveled. It was fraud, pure and simple. It was theft. "This says you become the sole owner, CLARA, Jack said, looking up from the page. "It says Americus is the beneficiary. It says I'm signing everything over. There's no mention of a contractor. There's no mention of repairs." CLARA's face flickered. For a second, the mask slipped. Then it was back, a little tighter. "No, honey, you're reading it wrong. This complicated legal language. Americus, explain it to him." Americus SCOO Ted closer, his ARM brushing Jack's. "See here, Jack, it's a trust structure. The trust is the investor. You're just transferring the property into the trust. You still get all the benefits. It's just a technicality." "A technicality," Jack repeated. He set the coffee down. He placed the document back on the table, his hand flat on the paper. He looked at Americus. Then he looked at CLARA. Then he looked at Elizabeth, who was pretending to be absorbed in the view. "I'm going to ask you a question," and I want you to answer me straight. The room went quiet. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Did you think I was stupid? Jack asked. He said it simply, without malice, without anger, just a cold, probing question. Ruckus laughed, a brittle sound. Come on, Jack. Don't be a paranoid old man. We're family. We're looking out for you. No, Jack said. You're looking out for yourselves. You think I'm a piece of furniture, piece of property. You think the only thing I own is this cabin, and you think you can just take it. You're wrong. Loretta snickered from the corner. Oh, he's getting dramatic. We're doing you a favor, Jack. You think you could keep this place up on your own, you couldn't handle a lawnmower. Jack's eyes flicked to her. The gaze was like a physical blow. She flinched and looked away. This is my home, Jack said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. I bought it with my own money, not my family's money. My money. Money I earned doing things you couldn't possibly imagine. You think I don't know what a power of attorney is? You think I don't know that my wife forged my signature on a medical proxy to get access to my bank accounts? CLA Ra's face went white. Jack, that's not true. You signed that paperwork at the hospital. You were sedated. I was sedated for a minor surgery, Jack replied. I was not sedated when I signed any document that gave you legal control over my assets. The signature on that document is a forgery. I know my own signature, CLARA. It's the only thing in this world I've been able to control for 40 years. And you took it. You took a piece of me and you forged it to steal from me. You're being paranoid, Elizabeth snapped, stepping four-way road. We have a family meeting. We decide what's best for everyone. You're just being stubborn. You've always been stubborn. You were a lousy husband, you were a lousy soldier, and you're a lousy... Stop, Jack said. The single word was like a gunshot. Elizabeth's mouth clamped shut. The authority in his voice was absolute. It was the voice of a man who had commanded men in battle. I'm going to give you one chance, Jack said. One chance to walk away. You will leave this cabin. You will drive back to the city. You will destroy those forged documents. And you will never mention this place again. CLARASTA read at him. Her eyes were wide. She looked at her brother. She looked at her mother. She was calculating. She was trying to figure out if he was bluffing. She'd always seen him as a passive man, a quiet man, a man who let her lead. She'd mistaken his silence for weakness. No, CLARA said, her voice RP. We're not leaving. You're old. You're tired. You're not thinking straight. We are retaking control of this situation. We are retaking control of this family. You will sign the papers, or I will have you read incompetent. I have the evidence. I have the doctor's reports. I will take you to court and you will lose. You will lose everything. She was good. Jack had to give her that. She was calculated and ruthless. She had the heart of a predator. But she was small time. She was playing in a sandbox. Jack had been fighting in a war that had never been written about. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a single folded piece of paper, thick and textured. It wasn't the microfiche. It was just a copy. A taste. You want to go to court, Jack said, unfolding the paper. Let's go to court. You want to bring the FBI, let's bring them. Because this paper here is a certified copy of a deed. But it's a deed not for this cabin. It's for a property in the Cayman Islands. Property held in a trust. A trust with your name on it. CLARA. A trust set up with money you embezzled from your father's company 3 years ago. Ruckus shot to his feet. That's a lie. Jack didn't look at him. He read at CLARA. Her face was a mask of horror. You thought you were so clever, Jack said. You thought I was a fool. You thought I wouldn't notice the money ring. You thought you'd moved it around enough. I know about it. I know about all of it. I know about your secret account. I know about Ruckus's gambling debts. I know about the fake righty Loretta runs. I know about everything. You're not stealing from me. You've been stealing from your own family for years. And I've been standing by, watching, giving you enough rope to hang yourselves. The silence was absolute. The fire popped. Outside, a bird chirped. It was the only sound. Now, Jack said, standing up. He was a giant in the room. He towered over them. I'm going to ask you one more time. Leave this cabin. Now. They didn't leave. They couldn't. They were too deep in their own deception, too committed to the lie. Cla Ra's eyes de root to Americus. Americus's jaw was clenched. Elizabeth was trembling. Loretta had backed against the wall, her face pale. You're bluffing? Clara hissed, her composure cracking. That document is a forgery. You're the one who forged it. You're trying to frame me. Jack smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You want to see a forgery? He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen. This is a recording. It's from 2 nights ago, in the basement of the Henderson building. You and Americus met with a man named Salvatore. He's a known associate of the Russian mob. You bought a network of stolen identities. You used those identities to move the money out of the country. I have the whole thing. The transaction. The exchange. Everything. Americus lunged at him. It was a clumsy, desperate move. Jack sidestepped with a fluidity that belied his age. His ARM shot out, his hand gripping Americus's wrist, twisting it back. Americus howled in pain, falling to his knees. Jack held him there, his grip like iron. Don't, Jack said. You don't know what I'm capable of. Americus was panting, his face contorted in pain. Clara was frozen. Elizabeth was screaming, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. Jack released Americus. He stepped back, straightening his shirt. The physical confrontation had been brief, but it had accomplished its purpose. It had broken the spell. They saw him not as a senile old man, but as something else. Something dangerous. You have 5 minutes to get your things and get out, Jack said. I'm calling a lawyer. I'm calling the authorities. You think you have a plan. You have nothing. You had a plan to steal a cabin. I have a plan to dismantle your entire lives. I have evidence for everything. The embezzlement, the identity theft, the conspiracy. It's all here, in this cabin, in my hands. So you can run, or you can stay. But if you stay, I'm going to be the one who decides what happens next. And I promise you, it will not be pleasant. Clara stood there, trembling. Her eyes were filled with a cold, calculating fury. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. You can't do this, she whispered. We're your family. This is my home too. No, Jack said. This is my home. This is my sanctuary. And you tried to violate it. You tried to strip me of everything I have. You are not my family. You are a thief. You are a parazit. And I am done with you. Loretta was crying now, her mascara running. Elizabeth was muttering prayers. Americus was clutching his wrist, his face white with pain and fear. Leave, Jack said again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The word hung in the air, an absolute command. Clara looked at her brother. She looked at her mother. She looked at Jack. The calculation was still going on behind her eyes. She had lost this round, she realized. He had outmaneuvered her. He had more information. He had more power. The illusion of her control was shattered. We'll go, she said finally, her voice thin. But this isn't over. You think you've won, you're wrong. You're just a weak, broken old man. You don't understand how the world works anymore. She grabbed her purse and stormed out the door. The others followed. A parade of defeated parasites. Americus shot Jack a venomous look as he passed. Elizabeth didn't even look at him. Jack stood there, listening to the sound of the car doors slamming. The engine ROA read to life. The tires screeched on the gravel as they sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust. He walked to the window and watched the car disappear into the trees. He felt no triumph. He felt no vindication. He felt a cold, empty satisfaction. He had protected his home. He had exposed their treachery. But he knew the battle wasn't over. He knew they would return. He knew that a cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. He walked to the table. He picked up the forged document. He looked at his forged signature. He crumpled it in his fist. He tossed it into the fire. The flames licked at the paper, devouring the lie. He went to the phone. He picked it up. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "It's me," he said. "They know." The voice on the other end was low and efficient. "We've been monitoring them. They're on the move." "Where?" "They're headed to the city. They're meeting with a contact. A man named B.A. Renese. We believe they're planning to escalate." "Of course they are," Jack said. "They're too arrogant to know they're beaten. They think they can still win." "What are your orders, sir?" Jack was silent for a moment. He looked around his cabin. The home he had built. The home they had tried to take. He thought about the years of service, the sacrifices he'd made. He thought about the quiet dignity he'd tried to create for himself. And he thought about the audacity of their betrayal. "Phase 3, Jack said. "Activate Phase 3. "Understood, sir. We'll be ready." Jack hung up the phone. He walked to the window and looked out at the forest. The wind was picking up. The trees swayed and groaned. It was a sound that echoed the turmoil inside him. He'd given them a chance. He'd showed them the evidence. He'd warned them. They had chosen to run, but they were running straight into a trap. A trap he had laid for them years ago. Just in case. He wasn't just protecting his cabin. He was protecting his legacy. He was a man who had built his life on control, on strategy, on the rifle manipulation of information. They had tried to strip that from him. They had tried to reduce him to a victim. They had made a very, very big mistake. He poured himself another cup of coffee. He sat down in his favorite chair by the fire. He had hours to wait. He had plans to refine. The wolves had been driven off, but he knew they'd return. They couldn't help themselves. They were predators, and they couldn't resist the scent of what they thought was easy prey. The fire crackled. The wind howled. Jack sat motionless, a statue of stone and steel. His eyes were fixed on the road that led to his property. He watched the snow begin to fall, thin at first, then thicker, until it was a white curtain that obscured the world. The storm was coming, and he knew with absolute certainty that the storm would bring them back to him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the burner phone again. He typed a second message, shorter than the first. "Prepare the perimeter. Non-lethal only. I want them alive." He put the phone away. He leaned back in his chair. A slow, deliberate breath escaped his lungs. He was not angry. He was not afraid. He was calm and patient, like a spider waiting in the center of its web. They thought they had escaped. They thought they had a chance to regroup and strike again. They didn't realize that every move they made, every phone call they placed, every mile they drove was being watched. They were dancing on a string, and he was the one pulling it. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the mantel and the soft whisper of the fire. Jack closed his eyes. He let his mind drift back to the years he had spent in the DRK. The years he had spent serving a country that didn't know his name. He had faced down enemies are more dangerous than CLARA and her scheming family. He had read into the eyes of men who had dedicated their lives to destroying everything he loved. And he had won. Every single time. This was no different. This was just another mission, another operation, another enemy to neutralize. He had retired from the service, but the service had never truly retired from him. The skills, the instincts, the cold precision of his mind, they were still there. They had never left. They had simply been dormant, waiting. And now they were awake. The snow continued to fall. The storm intensified. The road that wound through the forest was becoming impassable. A lesser man would have been trapped. A lesser man would have been afraid. But Jack was not a lesser man. He was the man who had built this cabin with his own 2 hands. He was the man who had chosen this place precisely because it was remote, isolated, defensible. He was the man who had planned for every contingency. He opened his eyes. He looked at the framed deed on the wall. His deed, his property, his sanctuary. "Come back," he whispered into the empty room. "I'll be waiting." The next 48 hours were a blur of tense anticipation. Jack didn't leave the cabin. He moved through his routine with a mechanical precision, chopping wood, cleaning the rifle he kept in the closet, and watching the road from the window. The silence was punctuated only by the occasional call from his contact in the city, updating him on the frantic movements of his former family that they were flailing. He'd kicked over their anthill. Americus had maxed out his credit cards trying to hire a lawyer. CLARA had been spotted in the back of a DRK sedan, meeting with a man who was known to have connections to a less-than-reputable asset recovery firm. They were trying to beat him to the punch, trying to get ahead of the evidence he'd implied he had. They were running a containment operation, which only meant they had a lot to contain. Jack sat at the table, a map of the county spread out before him. He had marked the locations of their known safe houses, their financial trails, their associates. He was a spider at the center of a web, and he could feel the vibrations of their panic. The moment of reckoning came on a Tuesday. The weather had turned sour, a cold front sweeping in from the Rockies, bringing with it heavy, wet snow. It was a blizzard, a white wall that obscured the world beyond his property line. It was the perfect cover. The first sign of trouble was the power cutting out. The lights flickered and died, plunging the cabin into a deep, unnatural darkness. The only sound was the howl of the wind and the crackle of the dead fire. Jack didn't move. He sat in his chair, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He heard it a moment later, the crunch of boots on the frozen snow outside. More than one pair. Heavy. Deliberate. The door burst open, splintering the old wood. Cold wind and snowflakes swirled in, a white cloud that was quickly followed by three figures into RK Tactical HAR. They moved with the fluid efficiency of professionals, fanning out into the room, their weapons raised. They were not the police. They were mercenaries, the kind you hired to do the kind of work that left no trace. Behind them, framed by the jagged hole where the door used to be, stood CLARA. She was wrapped in a heavy parka, her face pale against the fur-lined hood. The desperation in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had stopped running. She had decided to attack. "I told you it wasn't over, Jack," she said, her voice audible over the storm. "You should have just signed the papers." Jack remained seated. He looked at the men. They were big, their faces obscured by balaclavas. They held their weapons with practiced ease. They weren't amateurs. "This is your plan," Jack said, his voice calm. "You're going to have me killed in my own home to steal a cabin. You're more pathetic than I thought." "Don't be dramatic," CLARA said, stepping into the room. She was shivering, but her eyes were sharp. "We're not going to kill you. We're going to make you disappear. You're going to have a little accident. A hiking accident. The snow will cover your tracks. It happens all the time. Old veteran. Gets lost in the woods, his body found in the spring. It's a tragedy." One of the mercenaries, the one in the lead, moved toward Jack. He had a pair of zip ties in his hand. "Mr. Callahan," the man said, his voice distorted by the balaclava. "I would appreciate it if you didn't resist. We don't want to hurt you, but we will." Jack sighed. It was a long, wee sound. He reached down to the side of the chair. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for a switch. "You're right about one thing, CLARA," he said. "This is a tragedy. For you. You think you've been clever. You think you've been planning this for years. But I've been planning for my retirement for longer than you've been alive." He flicked the switch. Suddenly, the cabin was flooded with blinding light. It came from hidden panels in the ceiling, high-powered LEDs that turned the interior into a sterile operating theater. The mercenaries shielded their eyes, momentarily disoriented. Their weapons wavered. In that moment of hesitation, Jack moved. He didn't stand up. He just rolled out of the chair, his body a blur of motion. He swept his leg, catching the lead mercenary on the ankle, sending him crashing to the floor. The man's weapon skittered across the wood. Jack was on him in an instant, his knee on the man's chest, his hand pinning the man's wrist to the floor. It was a move that had been drilled into him 1,000 times, in 1,000 different rooms. The other two mercenaries raised their weapons, but they hesitated. They had a clear shot at Jack, but they couldn't take it without risking hitting their own man. "Drop your weapons," Jack commanded. His voice was different. It was the voice of a man who was used to giving orders and having them obeyed. "Do it. Now." They didn't drop their weapons. They looked at Clara, who was sta ring in shock. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the lights. She hadn't expected the speed. She hadn't expected Jack to fight. "Jack, stop!" she screamed. "They'll kill you." "They can try," Jack said. He twisted the man's arm. The mercenary grunted in pain, his face contorted. "I'm giving you a choice. You can drop your weapons, or you can learn what happens to people who break into my house. It's not pleasant." The two mercenaries exchanged glances. They were professionals. They were being paid well. But the job was going sideways. The target wasn't a target. He was a combatant. He was a civilian who had just neutralized one of their own in 3 seconds. It was a bad bet. They lowered their weapons. Slowly Jack stood up. He kept his eyes on them. He didn't look at Clara. "You're under arrest," Jack said, the words flat and final. "All of you, for attempted murder, for breaking and entering, for kidnapping, for conspiracy to commit fraud, for a lot of things. You'll find out in court." Clara was trembling. She was staring at the men, her mercenaries, her last defense, as they placed their weapons on the floor and raised their hands. "You can't do this, Jack," she said. "I'm your wife." "No," Jack said, finally looking at her. "You were my wife. You gave that up the moment you decided to have me killed. You gave it up when you forged those papers. You gave it up when you laughed with your family about stealing my home." He walked over to the phone. He picked it up. It was a secure line. He dialed a number. "Send the extraction team in," he said. "We have 3 hostiles, 1 non-hostile. The perimeter is clear. The weather is a problem, but I want them processed. Now." He hung up. He turned to face Clara. She was crying now, her tears frozen on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I needed the money. We needed the money." "You needed money," Jack repeated. "So you decided to kill me for it. That's not a reason. That's an excuse. And I've been listening to excuses my whole life." He walked over to the table. He opened a drawer. He pulled out a single photograph. It was an old one. A picture of him in uniform standing with a group of other men. They were in the desert, the sun blazing down on them. "See this," he said, holding up the picture. "These were my brothers. These were the men I trusted with my life. They were my family. They would have died for me. They did die for me. And you tried to steal from me. You tried to destroy me. You tried to kill me. You are nothing compared to them. You are less than nothing." Clara read at the photograph. Her face was a mess of TRS and mascara. She looked broken. "Please," she said. "Please, don't do this." Jack put the photograph back in the drawer. He looked at her. The anger was gone. There was only a cold, clinical detachment. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "You did this to yourself. You and your brother and your mother. You all did this to yourselves." The extraction team arrived within minutes. Their black vehicles cutting through the blizzard like Shah RKS through water. They moved silently, efficiently, securing the mercenaries and leading them out into the storm. Clara stood frozen. Watching her last hope disappear into the white void, Jack walked to the shattered door. The wind howled through the gap, bringing with it a fresh wave of snow. He looked out at the forest, at the trees bending under the weight of the storm. He didn't feel victorious. He felt empty, hollow. The woman he had loved, the family he had trusted, had tried to erase him from existence. And they had failed. But the cost of that failure was not theirs alone. It was his too. He had lost his wife. He had lost his illusions. All he had left was this cabin, this sanctuary, and the cold, hard truth of what people were capable of when they wanted what you had. He turned back to the room. Clara was still there, shivering. Her RMS wrapped around herself. What happens to me now? She asked. Her voice small. Jack looked at her. He saw the woman he had married. He saw the lies. He saw the betrayal. He saw the woman who had stood in the doorway and watched 3 armed men burst into his home. That's not my decision anymore, he said. That's for the law to decide. And for you to live with. He walked past her, out into the snow. The extraction team was loading the mercenaries into a van. The wind was fierce, biting at his face. He pulled his coat tighter and walked to the edge of the property. He stood there, alone, watching the storm rage around him. Behind him, the cabin stood dark and silent. The home he had built, the home they had tried to take. It was still his, but it felt different now. Felt colder, felt emptier. He had won the battle, but he knew, deep in his bones, that the war was far from over. The extraction team worked with mechanical precision. Within 20 minutes, the mercenaries were secured in the back of an unmarked van. Their hands cuffed, their faces blank. They were professionals who had been paid to do a job and had failed. They knew the consequences. They didn't speak. They didn't resist. They simply accepted their fate. Clara was treated differently. She was led to a separate vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows. Jack watched as Riley, the lead ghost, opened the door for her. She hesitated, looking back at the cabin, at the shattered door, at Jack standing in the snow. Her eyes were pleading. She wanted him to say something, to offer some shred of mercy. He gave her nothing. Get in, Riley said, his voice flat. She climbed into the SUV. The door closed behind her. The engine sta route. The vehicle pulled away, its tires churning through the deep snow, and Giuseppe read into the white curtain of the storm. Jack stood there for a long time, the wind biting at his face, the snow piling up around his boots. He watched until the taillights vanished. Then he turned and walked back to the cabin. The door was a ruin. Splintered wood hung from the hinges, and the cold air poured in, carrying with it the howl of the storm. Jack surveyed the damage. He didn't curse. He didn't sigh. He simply began to work. He found a heavy sheet of plywood in the shed, one he had cut and prepared months ago for this exact purpose. He ried it back to the cabin, fitted it over the gaping hole and nailed it into place. The sound of his hammer echoed through the empty room, a rhythmic, steady beat. It was the sound of a man reclaiming his space, his control. When the door was secured, he built up the fire. He fed it logs from the pile he had chopped the day before. The flames caught and grew, pushing back the cold, casting warm light across the room. He sat down in his chair, the same chair he had been sitting in when they burst through the door. He looked around the cabin. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been damaged beyond the door. His home was intact. His home was safe. But he didn't feel safe. He felt exposed. The illusion of peace, of anonymity, had been shattered. They had found him. They had come for him. They had shown him that there was no hiding from the past, no running from the life he had lived. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the burner phone. There were no messages, no calls. The extraction team was handling the situation. He trusted them. He had trained them. He had built them from the ground up, a network of ghosts who operated in the shadows, answering to no one but him. They would process Clara and her men. They would make sure the evidence was secured. They would make sure the authorities were informed or not informed, depending on what Jack decided. He set the phone on the table. He looked at the photograph he had shown Clara. The men in the desert, his brothers, his family, they were all gone now, dead or retired, scattered across the globe. He was the last of them, the sole survivor, and he had come to this place, this quiet corner of the world, to live out his final years in peace. But peace was a luxury he could not afford. He stood up and walked to the wall where the deed was framed. He took it down, held it in his hands. He could feel the weight of the paper, the weight of his ownership. 38 acres. A cabin he had built with his own hands. A sanctuary he had reved out of the wilderness. And they had tried to take it from him. He placed the deed back on the wall. He turned to the safe in the corner, the antique safe that Americus had been eyeing during dinner. He knelt down, spun the dial and opened it. Inside were more documents, more evidence, more weapons. A small cache of cash. Passport with a different name. A lockbox containing a dozen burner phones, each one linked to a different network, a different country. He took out one of the phones. He powered it on. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago. "Sir," the voice on the other end said. It was a woman's voice, cool and professional. "We've secured the asset. The hostel's in holding. Your wife is in a separate room. She's been debriefed. She's asked to speak with you." "She can wait," Jack said. "What about the others, the brother, the mother?" Americus was picked up at his apartment an hour ago. Elizabeth was apprehended at the airport. She was trying to flee the country. They're both in custody. The evidence has been handed over to the proper authorities. The charges are being filed as we speak." Jack nodded. "And the mercenaries out of the game. They've been dealt with. They won't be coming back." "Good." He paused. "Is there any blowback, any indication that someone else was involved?" "None, sir. This was a local operation. Their own initiative. No outside interference." Jack exhaled slowly. That was a relief. He had been worried that CLARA had been working with someone else. Someone from his past. Someone who knew who he really was. But it seemed she had acted alone. A desperate woman, driven by greed, surrounded by incompetent conspirators. "Keep her there," he said. "I'll come to her when I'm ready." "Understood, sir." He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the storm. The snow was still falling, but it was lighter now. The wind had died down. The world outside was silent, muffled, peaceful. He was alone. Truly alone. The cabin was empty. The family was gone. The enemies were captured. He had won. And yet, as he stood there, he felt a strange sense of loss. Not for the people he had lost, but for the life he had imagined. He had pictured himself growing old in this cabin, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the forest, living out his days in simple contentment. He had pictured CLARA by his side, laughing at his jokes, showering his life. He had been wrong. He had been a fool. He had trusted a woman who saw him only as a meal ticket, a stepping stone to a better life. He had married a parazit. He had built a life on a lie. He turned away from the window. He walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He drank it slowly, his eyes fixed on the fire. The flames danced and flickered, casting shadows on the walls. He thought about his next move. He had 3 prisoners. He had mountains of evidence. He had the law on his side. He could let the system handle it. He could let CLARA rot in prison. Let Americus lose everything. Let Elizabeth spend her final years in disgrace. It would be justice. Cold, impartial, legal. But justice was not enough. Justice was for ordinary men. Jack was not an ordinary man. He had spent decades operating outside the law, protecting the innocent, punishing the guilty. He had been a judge, a jury, and an executioner. He had done things that would never see the light of day. He had ended lives, destroyed empires, erased enemies. And CLARA, his wife, had tried to erase him. He set the glass down. He walked to the safe and opened it again. He took out a small, leather-bound notebook. He opened it to a blank page. He picked up a pen and began to write. It was a list of everything they had taken from him. The money, the trust, the years, the peace. He wrote down every lie, every betrayal, every moment of cruelty. He wrote until the page was full. Then he closed the notebook and put it back in the safe. He had been patient. He had been merciful. He had given them chances they didn't deserve. And they had thrown those chances back in his face. No more. He walked to the closet. He pushed aside the flannel shirts. He reached for the lockbox. He opened it. Inside, beside the stack of documents, was a small black device. It was a data key, a collection of every piece of information he had gathered over the years. Every secret, every transaction, every crime. He held it in his palm. It was small, unassuming, but it contained enough power to destroy lives, end careers, bring down governments. He put it in his pocket. He walked to the chair by the fire and sat down. He looked at the plywood covering the door. He looked at the deed on the wall. He looked at the empty room around him. He had been a ghost. He had been a weapon. He had been a husband. He had been a victim. But he was not any of those things anymore. He was something else. Something new. Something that had been forged in the fire of betrayal. He was the master of this house. And he was about to remind everyone who had forgotten exactly what that meant. The storm had passed by morning. Jack stood at the window, watching the sun rise over a world painted white. The snow was deep, pristine, untouched. It was beautiful. It was also a lie, covering the tracks of the violence that had taken place the night before. He had spent the remaining hours of darkness planning. He had not slept. Sleep was a luxury for men who had no enemies. Jack had plenty. Riley arrived at dawn. His black SUV was the first vehicle to break the silence of the new snow. He walked up to the cabin, his boots crunching with each step. He surveyed the plywood covering the shattered door and gave a slight nod of approval. He knocked. A sharp, efficient rap. Jack opened the door. Report. She's asking for you, Riley said. She's been asking all night. She's SCA red, sir. Genuinely SCA red. She knows it's over. She wants to beg for mercy. Jack stepped out into the cold. The air was crisp, biting, clean. He walked past Riley and got into the SUV. The engine hummed as Riley slid into the driver's seat and pulled away from the cabin. They drove through the forest, the snow-covered trees passing like silent witnesses. Jack said nothing. He STA read ahead, his face unreadable. The safe house was a nondescript building on the outskirts of a small town 60 miles away. It looked like a Wari house, but the interior was a fortress. Reinforced doors, surveillance cameras, a command center filled with monitors and communications equipment. The ghosts moved through the space with quiet efficiency, acknowledging Jack with brief nods as he passed. Riley led him to a small room at the end of a long hallway. The door was steel with a single, narrow window. Riley unlocked it and stepped aside. She's inside, he said. Take as long as you need. Jack pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was small, la richer than a closet. A single table, 2 chairs, and a rebulb hanging from the ceiling. Clara sat in one of the chairs, her hands cuffed to the table. Her hair was a mess. Her makeup was SMEA red. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw Jack, her eyes widened. She tried to stand, but the cuffs held her in place. Jack, she breathed. Jack, thank God. You came. I knew you would come. Jack sat down across from her. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. Please, she said, her voice trembling. Please, Jack. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was M.A. Ruckus. It was all M.A. Ruckus's idea. He said we could get the money. He said you'd never even notice. He said we could just take the cabin and sell it and no one would ever know. M.A. Ruckus, Jack repeated. His voice was flat, empty. Yes, M.A. Ruckus. He's the one who got the mercenary rise. He's the one who planned everything. I just went along with it because I was SCA red. SCA red of him. SCA red of losing everything. TRS streamed down her cheeks. Please, Jack, you have to believe me. I love you. I've always loved you. I made a terrible mistake. Jack leaned back in his chair. He studied her face. The lies, the manipulation, the performance. She was good. He had to give her that. Even now, even with everything on the line, she was still playing the game. Still trying to manipulate him. Still trying to find a way out. Clara, he said. I know everything. She froze. The TRS stopped. The trembling stopped. I know about the forged power of attorney. I know about the Cayman Islands Trust. I know about the identity theft. I know about the Russian mob. I know about the mercenary rise. I know it was your idea. You were the one who brought M.A. Ruckus in. You were the one who recruited Elizabeth. You were the one who orchestrated the entire plot. You didn't just go along with it. You led it. CLA Ra's face went white. That's not true. That's not true. Americus told you that. He's lying. He's trying to save himself. He didn't tell me anything, Jack said. I already knew. I've known for years. I knew the moment you forged that first signature. I knew the moment you sta root draining the accounts. I knew the moment you met with Salvatore. I've been watching you, Clara. I've been watching all of you. I gave you every chance to stop. I gave you every opportunity to come clean. And you chose to double down. You chose to have me killed. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes to root around the room, sea urging for an escape that didn't exist. You're going to prison, Jack said. All of you. Americus, Elizabeth, Loretta, the mercenaries. And you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The forged documents, the financial records, the recordings, the witnesses. There's no way out. There's no deal. There's no mercy. You tried to take everything from me, and now you're going to lose everything you have. Clara broke. She collapsed four-way RD, her head hitting the table, a sob ring from her throat. I'm sorry, she wailed. I'm so sorry. Please, Jack. I'll do anything. I'll go away. I'll disappear. I'll never bother you again. Just don't send me to prison. Please. I can't. I can't do that. Jack stood up. He looked down at her. This broken woman. This predator who had tried to devour him. He felt no pity, no sympathy, no trace of the love he had once felt. Your father's medical bills, he said. You used that as an excuse. You told yourself it was for the family. But we both know the truth. You were just greedy. You wanted more. You wanted Aspen and fast cars and shopping sprees. You didn't want a cabin. You didn't want a quiet life. You wanted everything. And you were willing to destroy me to get it. He walked to the door. He knocked once. Riley opened it from the outside. Take her away, Jack said. Process her with the others. Make sure the authorities get everything they need. Jack, please, Clara screamed. Don't do this. I'm begging you. I'm your wife. Jack paused at the door. He turned back to look at her one last time. You were my wife, he said. But you stopped being my wife the moment you decided to steal from me. You stopped being my wife the moment you laughed with your brother about taking my home. You stopped being my wife the moment you brought a medmen into my sanctuary. You are a stranger to me now. A stranger who tried to kill me. And I have no mercy for strangers who try to kill me. He walked out. The door slammed shut behind him. He could hear her sobbing through the steel, but he didn't stop. He walked down the hallway, past the monitors, past the ghosts, out into the cold morning air. Riley followed him outside. What's next? Sir Jack stood in the snow, looking up at the clear blue sky. The storm had passed. The world was quiet, peaceful. But he knew that peace was an illusion. There were always more enemies, more threats, more people who would try to take what he had built. Close the file, he said. Let the system handle it. I'm done. Done? Riley asked, a note of surprise in his voice. Done, Jack repeated. I'm retired. That's the whole point. I bought that cabin to get away from all of this. The games, the manipulations, the betrayals. I'm done playing. I'm done fighting. I just want to live out my days in peace. Riley nodded slowly. And if they come back, Jack smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. They won't. Not after this. But even if they do, I'll be ready. That's the difference between them and me. They think they can win. I know I already have. He walked to the SUV and got into the passenger seat. Riley climbed in behind the wheel. They drove back through the forest, back Tower RD the cabin. Tower RD the home Jack had built with his own two hands. The sun was high now, the snow glittering like diamonds. Jack watched the trees pass, his mind drifting. He thought about Clara. He thought about Americus and Elizabeth and Loretta. He thought about the years he had wasted on people who never deserved his trust. That he didn't feel anger. He didn't feel sadness. He felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. It was a familiar feeling. He had felt it before in the aftermath of other missions, other operations, other endings. It was the feeling of a job completed, a task finished, a chapter closed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the data key. He held it in his palm, feeling its weight. All that power, all that information, all the secrets he had gathered over a lifetime. He could use it. He could destroy more lives, bring more people to justice, reshape the world in his image. He put the key back in his pocket. Not today. Today he just wanted to go home. The cabin was quiet when Jack returned. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cold had begun to seep back in. He rebuilt it, feeding the flames until they ROA red again. The warmth spread through the room, pushing back the chill. He stood there watching the fire, feeling the heat on his face. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence, of solitude, of rebuilding. Jack worked on the door, replacing the plywood with new oak planks. He sanded them smooth, stained them to RK, fitted them into the frame. The work was meditative, a way to keep his hands busy while his mind processed everything that had happened. He spoke to Riley twice. The first time, he was informed that CLARA, M.A. Ricus, Elizabeth, and Loretta had been formally charged. The evidence had been presented to a federal prosecutor, a man Jack had worked with decades ago. The charges were extensive: fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, identity theft, attempted murder. The list went on. They would be arraigned in a week. There was no chance of bail. They would remain in custody until their trial. The second time, Riley told him that M.A. Ricus had attempted to hang himself in his cell. He had failed. He was now under suicide watch, sedated, B.A. Rely coherent. Loretta had offered to testify against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. Elizabeth had suffered a minor stroke and was in a medical facility. CLARA was refusing to speak to anyone. She had retained a lawyer, but the lawyer had already admitted that the case was unwinnable. Jack listened to the reports without emotion. He felt nothing for them. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a cold, distant acknowledgement that the machinery of justice was grinding four-way RD, as it always did. On the fourth day, Jack received an unexpected visitor. He was chopping wood in the RD when he RD the sound of an engine. He looked up to see a sleek black CAR pulling up to the cabin. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, distinguished, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the rustic setting. He walked toward RD Jack with a confident stride. "Jack Callahan," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm William B.A. Renese. I believe you know my firm." Jack didn't take the hand. He rested the axe on his shoulder and studied the man. B.A. Renese. The name was familiar. It was the contact CLARA had met with in the city. The asset recovery firm. "I know who you are, Jack said. "What do you want?" B.A. Renese lowered his hand, unfazed. "I'm here to offer you a deal. Your wife hired my firm to recover certain assets. She failed to inform us of the full nature of the situation. We were led to believe that you were incapacitated, that we were acting in your best interest. We were misled." Jack said nothing. He waited. "Your wife's case is going to trial," B.A. Renese continued. "It's going to be a media circus. A federal case involving a decorated veteran, a conspiracy to steal his property, an attempted murder. It's going to make headlines. My firm is in the business of protecting our clients' reputations. And your wife is no longer our client. We have no interest in being associated with her. So you came here to apologize," Jack said. "How touching." B.A. Renese smiled. It was a thin, practiced smile. "I came here to offer you a settlement, a significant sum of money. In exchange, you agree to keep my firm's name out of the proceedings. You agree to not mention our involvement. You agree to let us walk away clean." Jack Sta read at him. He set the axe down, leaning it against the woodpile. He walked toward B.A. Renese, stopping just a few feet away. He was taller than B.A. Renese, broader, and the YRS of HRD labor had given him a physical presence that the lawyer Clea RLY found unsettling. "You think I see a re about money?" Jack asked. You think I see about your reputation. You think I'm going to take a bribe to protect the firm that tried to help my wife steal my home. B.A. Renese took a step back. I'm not offering a bribe. I'm offering a business arrangement. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Your life is peaceful out here. You don't want the attention. You don't want the media camped out on your doorstep. You sign a non-disclosure, take the money, and this all goes away. Jack laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You have no idea who I am, do you? B.A. Renese blinked. I'm sorry. You come out here to my home and you try to buy me off. You think I'm some old, simple man who can be bribed with a check. You think I don't understand the game you're playing. Jack took another step closer. I've been in this game longer than you've been alive. I faced down men who would eat you for breakfast. I've destroyed empires. I've ended wars. And you insignificant little parazit, you think you can come to my house and tell me what to do? B.A. Renese's face went pale. Mr. Callahan, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Jack said. I know about your firm. I know about your connection to the Russian mob. I know about the money you've laundered. I know about the clients you've cheated. I know everything, and I have the evidence to prove it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the data key. He held it up so B.A. Renese could see it. This is a collection of every transaction, every conversation, every piece of evidence I've gathered over the years. It includes everything about your firm, every crime, every deception, every dirty deal. I have enough on you to put you away for the rest of your life. B.A. Renese sta read at the key. His composure cracked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. You're bluffing. I never bluff, Jack said. You came here to make a deal. I'll make you a deal instead. You walk away. You forget this cabin exists. You never contact me again. And in exchange, I won't destroy your entire life. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. B.A. Renese swallowed hard. He looked at the key. He looked at Jack. He saw the cold certainty in the old man's eyes and knew, with absolute conviction, that he was not bluffing. He was a predator, and Jack was something far more dangerous. I'll take the deal, B.A. Renese said. His voice a whisper. I'll walk away. Good, Jack said. He pocketed the key. Now get off my property. B.A. Renese didn't hesitate. He turned and walked back to his car, his steps quick, almost stumbling. He climbed in, slammed the door, and the engine ROA read to life. The car sped away, tires kicking up gravel. To sap a ring down the road. Jack watched it go. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the same cold emptiness he had felt for days. He walked back to the cabin. He built a fire. He sat in his chair. The flames crackled and danced, casting shadows on the walls. The cabin was warm. The cabin was safe. The cabin was his. But it was empty. The people who had filled it with laughter and lies were gone. The family he had trusted was gone. The woman he had loved was gone. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the data key. He held it in his palm, feeling its weight. All that power. All that information, all those secrets. He could use it. He could destroy B.A. Renese. He could destroy the firm. He could destroy everyone who had ever wronged him. He stood up. He walked to the fire. He held the key over the flames. He hesitated. The key glinted in the firelight. It was a small, black object, but it contained the sum total of a lifetime of work. A lifetime of sacrifice. A lifetime of secrets. He dropped it into the fire. The flames devoured it. The plastic melted. The circuits fried. The data, all that information, all that power turned to ash. Jack watched it burn, his face expressionless. He turned away from the fire. He walked to the window and looked out at the forest. The snow was melting. The first signs of spring were beginning to show. The world was waking up. He was done. Done with the secrets. Done with the power. Done with the games. He had spent his life fighting for something he had never truly understood. He had fought for his country, for his brothers, for his family. And in the end, All he had was an empty cabin and a fire that was slowly dying. He heard a sound behind him. He turned. The cabin was empty. The fire crackled. The wind whispered against the walls. But he could have sworn he heard a voice. A familiar voice. The voice of a woman he had once loved. "I'm sorry, Jack," the voice whispered. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head. It was just the wind. Just his imagination. The past was gone. The people were gone. The only thing left was the present. The only thing left was the cabin. The only thing left was him. He sat back down in his chair. He watched the fire burn. He watched the flames dance and flicker, casting shadows on the walls. The cabin was Wa'aram. The cabin was safe. The cabin was his. The fire crackled. The wind howled. Jack sat alone, a ring into the flames, and he thought about nothing at all. The fire burned low. Jack watched the embers glow and fade, each one a small death in the dark. He had dropped the key into the flames. He had let Renise walk. He had sent Clara and her family to face the weight of the law. The cabin was his. The war was over. But the silence was heavier than he had expected. It pressed against him, filled every corner, suffocated the space where laughter and voices had once lived. He had won. He had protected his home. He had exposed every lie, every betrayal, every scheme. And now he sat alone in the chair by the fire, the same chair where he had listened to them plot his destruction. He looked at the door. The new oak planks were solid. The frame was strong. No one would burst through again. No one would come for him. The ghosts were gone. The wolves were caged. The forest outside was quiet, peaceful, still. And yet, Jack could not shake the feeling that something was waiting. Not out in the snow. Not in the trees. Something inside him. Something cold and restless that had not been there before. He had spent his life fighting enemies he could see, enemies he could touch, enemies he could destroy. But this was different. This was the silence after the battle. The stillness after the storm. The emptiness after the betrayal. He stood up. He walked to the window. The moon hung low over the trees, casting silver light across the melting snow. Spring was coming. The world was turning. Life would go on. But Jack felt like he was standing still, frozen in the moment when everything he had believed in had crumbled to dust. He thought about Clara. Not the woman who had stood in the doorway with mercenaries behind her. The other woman. The one he had married. The one who had laughed at his jokes and held his hand in the dark. He wondered if she had ever been real. If any of it had been real. Or if it had all been a performance. A long con. A carefully crafted lie designed to strip him of everything he had built. He would never know. He would never trust again. That was the price of survival. That was the cost of victory. He turned from the window. He walked back to the chair. He sat down. The fire was almost dead now, just a few glowing coals. He didn't add more wood. He let it fade. He let the darkness creep in. The cabin was silent. The wind was still. Jack closed his eyes and listened to the sound of his own breathing. It was the only sound in the world. The only proof that he was still alive. Still here. Still standing. He had won. He had kept his home. He had destroyed his enemies. He had done everything right. But as the last ember died and the cabin was swallowed by the dark, Jack Callahan opened his eyes and realized that victory had never felt so empty.